Wonderful to be here today. And thank you for Pastor Lynn for the invitation to be here. It's wonderful to go around to congregations to share about the ministry that I do, the ministry that is exciting to me, that is wonderful to meet all sorts of different people from all sorts of different places. People who come to University of Iowa hospitals, who don't come there because of a hangnail, but who come there because of very serious illnesses. And it's wonderful to come around to congregations to share about the work I do as the ELCA chaplain, as the chaplain sponsored by Lutheran Chaplaincy Outreach. Lutheran Chaplaincy Outreach is the organization that was incorporated in March of 2005, when funding for the Lutheran chaplaincy was withdrawn. And a group of pastors said, wait a minute, we need to continue to have a Lutheran chaplain at University of Iowa hospitals. So this Lutheran chaplaincy is really an outreach chaplaincy, an outreach ministry of ELCA congregations from throughout Iowa and also from other congregations. And this is a partnership that has two parts. The first part of this partnership is that Lutheran Chaplaincy Outreach receives funds from congregations, individuals, and organizations, such as Women of the ELCA. This chaplaincy is not supported by the hospital. It's not supported by any synod. It is completely supported by the church. And so it's because of the graciousness of ELCA congregations and organizations and individuals that makes it possible for there to be a Lutheran chaplain at University of Iowa hospitals and clinics. And hopefully you have received a brochure and an envelope as you've come in. If you haven't seen one, please grab one when you leave, and you can use that envelope as you see fit. But secondly, there's another part of this partnership that's also very important. And that's the partnership that is between myself and pastors and congregations. Pastor Lynn knows to call me when she's got a member of this congregation that's at University of Iowa hospitals. She knows to call me and say, hey, can you visit Sue Smith, who's at the hospital? Or if I visit somebody at the hospital from this congregation and they want Pastor Lynn to know, I can call Pastor Lynn and say, can you visit Sue Smith? She wants you to know that she is here at the hospital. That is, of course, with the patient's permission. So through Lutheran Chaplaincy Outreach, your ministry is expanded to those people who are members of your congregation, who are at the hospital. But it is also expanded to other Lutherans who are not members of this congregation, to people who are not Lutherans, people of other faiths, or people of no faith, from people from around the region who need to know God's love. Those are people who are reached through Lutheran Chaplaincy Outreach. And I think the best way that a person can know about the ministry is to hear stories. I have some stories to share. The stories are true. They're not made up, although some of the details are changed to protect the privacy of the people I'm talking about. I got a referral. It was a Friday just to visit Mary. Didn't seem like an urgent referral, so I waited until later in the day. I went in to see Mary. Mary had had heart surgery earlier in the week. She was doing really well. And so I visited her, and she was going home Monday. And she was very adamant that before she went home, she wanted to be baptized. She had grown up in the church, but for some reason her mother never took her to be baptized as an infant. She tried to be baptized as an adult. Her pastor was of the belief that to be baptized you had to do it in front of the congregation in a worship service. And Mary had even tried to do that. One day she had gone up in front to be baptized, but she had severe anxiety, and she had a panic attack, and she actually had to leave the worship service, and she could not be baptized. Now at age 50, after facing her own mortality in her heart surgery, Mary had a deep desire to be named and claimed as a child of God, to receive the gifts of salvation and eternal life. Her whole face lit up when we talked about the possibility of being baptized there in the hospital. For me to deny her this sacrament would have been unconscionable. So we decided to do the baptism that Monday in the hospital. And we decided to invite her mother to be there. So Monday, next to her hospital bed, with hospital-like things around her, we celebrated the sacrament of holy baptism with her mother by her side. In the midst of her tears, Mary expressed the peace and the joy that she felt. She hugged me and thanked me for baptizing her. She knew that day that her life had been changed forever and that it was now complete. One day I had received a page from one of my pastor partners. He had a 4-year-old parishioner who was being transferred to university hospitals. He was very concerned about Stevie. Stevie was quite ill. They didn't know what was wrong with Stevie. And the pastor wanted me to visit Stevie and his parents and wanted me to get back to him to let him know what was going on, if that was appropriate. So the pastor told me about Stevie. Stevie was a personable, precocious child who loved to go to worship, who loved to sing and pray and be with all the other people in the congregation. Stevie's very favorite thing was to go up to the front of the congregation. They had a big, tall, plastic tubing thing on a wooden stand. I don't know if you remember those. I remember those. We had those. They were for World Hunger. There was a tall plastic tube on a wooden stand, and people would come up and put quarters in the tube. And then when the tube was full, the quarters would go to World Hunger. Well, this congregation did that every Sunday. And they would put quarters in that tube, and the quarters would go to something to help people in need. And so Stevie really loved to do that. Except he wouldn't just bring up his own quarters. He would go all around the people around him and get everybody else's quarters. And then he'd run up and put the quarters in that tube, because he knew that those quarters were going to help somebody who was in need. The pastor told me that the quarters that month were going to Lutheran chaplaincy outreach. So I knew that I had a really neat opportunity to thank Stevie for those quarters who were helping me visit people like him who were sick. So I went into Stevie's room. Stevie was being cuddled in his mother's arms. And his dad was doing what dads often do, and that was pacing the floor. There was that concerned, worried looks on his parents' faces. They didn't know what was wrong yet with Stevie. I introduced myself as the Lutheran Chaplaincy Outreach Chaplain. And there was still a small sparkle in Stevie's eyes. And I thanked Stevie for those quarters in that tube. Those quarters that helped me be there to visit people like him who were sick and who needed to know about God's love. And I could see a small smile in Stevie's lips. And he knew that he was helping. After a few days of testing, a few days of treatment, Stevie was able to go home with a healthier body. And I'm sure that Stevie and his parents left that hospital with a greater sense of partnership, with a greater sense of how the church works together, and how those quarters in the tube, each of those quarters, really help others. The mission of Lutheran Chaplaincy Outreach is to compassionately share the good news of God's healing, love, and grace through providing an evangelical Lutheran Church in America chaplain at the University of Iowa hospitals and clinics. It's an honor to have served almost 23 years in a place of healing, to remind people of God's light and care that in many ways is already and always there. Kathy. I knew Kathy quite well. She had had cancer. She had had a bone marrow transplant. And if any of you know about that process, it's a grueling process. Many months. She had had all the problems that a person could have with that. So I knew her quite well. She was in and out of the hospital. She lived a couple hours away from the hospital. Her pastor would come every so often, but he did a lot of the pastoral care to her husband and 2 small children. Kathy was kind of opposite personality type than mine. She was kind of an introvert, and I'm kind of an extrovert. And sometimes it would be a little uncomfortable visiting her, but she always welcomed me. And we always had a nice visit, and I always prayed with her, and sometimes I would bring Holy Communion. This time Kathy was in the hospital for several weeks. I went into Kathy's room. And I had a sense that something was not quite right. Something was going on. And I said, "Kathy, how are you today?" She looked at me and she said, "I'm not very good. The doctor said there's nothing more that they can do for me. But to be very honest with you, what I wanted to do was I wanted to walk out of the room. Because I didn't know what to say. I didn't know what to pray. And Holy Communion, which at that point seemed like a meaningless ritual. Well, I'm a preacher. I guess I said something. I guess I said a prayer and told her I would be back after the weekend. Monday I went back into her room. I said, Kathy, how are you today? She looked at me. She smiled. She said, I'm wonderful. I said, wait. When I saw you Friday, you weren't wonderful. You were sad. You were in darkness. You were in despair. What's happened? And she said, I gave it up. I gave my illness to God. I realized that I can't handle things on my own. That God needs to take care of things. I've placed myself in God's hands and know that God will always take care of things. Wow. I'm not really sure what happened there. I'm pretty sure it wasn't anything I did, or anything Kathy did, or anything her pastor did, or anything all of us did. But I'm pretty sure that that was the Holy Spirit touching her heart and her life. And all those things she learned in Sunday school, and all those things she did in worship, and all those things all her life finally coming to her heart, saying, it's okay. I've got you. I love you. You are mine forever. You don't have to worry. You are healed. Wow. 7 weeks later, we were in Kathy's room. Kathy's immediate family, a few close friends, and her pastor. And we did what families do when they get together, and that's tell stories. We were telling Kathy stories. Her pastor celebrated Holy Communion. Kathy was not able to partake. She was unconscious. But she was surrounded by that wonderful promises of that communion. And we sang. Kathy loved all those songs, the oldie moldy, old hymns and the new hymns. You see, that night was a celebration of Kathy's life, a celebration of the life we have in Jesus Christ. The next morning, I was honored to be with Kathy and her immediate family when Kathy died. You see, Kathy didn't survive her illness or the treatments. Her body didn't survive. Oh, but Kathy did. Oh, but Kathy is dancing and singing and celebrating And I'm going to suggest that what Kathy experienced and that what we saw in Kathy was nothing short of a miracle. Thanks be to God.